it's these kind of guys that could be your internal guy or some external guy stealing your data. And it's very difficult to understand or find out who these people are if you don't have that type of program or policies that are in place for you to either find these individuals or see what kind of data they're exfiltrating from your organization. And please feel free, if you guys have questions, certainly just raise your hand. It's not something that just puking slides. So if you guys have questions, let me know. So what we're going to cover in this particular slide deck is what is it, the types of systems, the data identification, and where to start, and how we measure success. And it's very important to understand that this presentation is everything you do prior to getting any kind of technology. This is not a technology type of discussion. This is things you need to do way before you decide which technology you're going to be using. So those of you who do not know what DLP is, it's data loss prevention. It's leakage or some types of data leaving your organization. What in some form, either it's malware, hard drives, your mobile devices, anything along those lines. And how we understand or how we define data is while in use, in motion, and at rest. So typically, organizations tend to have a lot more data at rest that they know exists. And in a lot of cases, it's upwards of multiple terabytes. A lot of times people will inadvertently exfiltrate data, whether through it's an email or I'm going to email the spreadsheet to my Gmail so I can work at home. And sometimes that just may not be within policy. But if there's no restrictions, nobody's going to prevent that from happening. Why we, in a lot of cases, why we need to have some sort of program in place. Obviously, compliance drives a lot of this budgets. I'm sure in other organizations that may be the case that you guys work at. But without that compliance, a lot of times organizations are like, well, it hasn't happened yet. We don't care. Why would they want me or why would they want my data? But again, this is compliance is definitely pushing agendas and budgets. Other reasons why we need some data loss prevention. In a lot of cases, some of the projects that I've worked on it has identified a lot of broken business practices. And what I mean by that is just like I mentioned before, is if you're emailing a spreadsheet to your Gmail or Yahoo Mail to work on it at home, that may be a business process that is broken, where we don't want that individual, we don't want any individuals having that kind of data sent out in that environment. Also, you plug in your hard or your mobile device to charge your phone on your computer, but what you're really doing is you could have 32, 64, 120 gig hard drive. You can copy and paste virtually anything you want on there. And again, the reason being is that could save companies from some type of breach, and even inadvertent that could affect the bottom line. Predominantly, there's two types of systems: network and host-based. For network, we call them gateway-based, and it's dedicated hardware, and it allows you to intercept some sort of traffic and interrogate it, and based on some sort of rule set or some sort of compliance, you can say, yes, this is okay, or this is somehow flagged as being confidential. We don't want this to go anywhere. And with everything being encrypted nowadays, there are some bolt-ons that you can be the man in the middle to look inside what people are actually sending. And then host-based obviously runs on the endpoints. You have a little bit more control of what type of data is on those endpoints. You can control email, USB activity, whether you're going to disable the USB or not. Or anything that gets plugged into the USB may have to be encrypted, something along those lines. So, one of the most important aspects of a DLP type program or process is the data identification. A lot of times companies will say, okay, we're just going to get this piece of technology, put it on the network, and that's going to be our compliance check for DLP. And in a lot of cases, that's putting the cart before the horse. If you don't know where your data is, you're going to have a lot tougher time understanding that program and what it actually means from an ROI. You're not going to be fully utilizing that. But definitely looking at or finding that data identification is imperative. Another reason why you need to identify all that data is once you have that technology in place, or if you're looking at the type of data, you can find a way of lowering your false positives. Without being accurate, you're never going to understand or find out what it is that you're after if you don't know that this Word document contains Social Security numbers or credit card numbers. But if you don't have that identified with some sort of marking or severity or data owner, you're not going to be successful with that. So the types of data that we're predominantly looking for is PII, PHI, in a lot of cases financials, intellectual property is huge, source code, whether it be CAD drawings, mergers and acquisition type of information is always pretty huge. Recently, I think it was yesterday, that they claimed the Chinese hacked some more government-related systems, thus exposing a lot of that data out there. So again, this would somehow, if everything was encrypted or at least tagged with some sort of something that's the types of data that we're looking for. So a lot of times people come to me and they'll say when we're doing the DLP program or a project, as they'll call it, they'll just say, hey, why can't we just buy this particular box and have DLP? And that's really not the best way of doing it, because you don't know where the data is, you don't know who owns the data, if it's in motion, at rest, and how much of it is at rest. In a lot of cases, I did one, it was like 20 some odd terabytes of just at rest data, and you basically have to classify all of that type of data. And it's just you just can't say let's just implement DLP. It's a much broader project than that. Maybe a question so far? So, before we start to implement any kind of DLP program, you have to understand what your network looks like. In a lot of cases, when we ask, well, what does your network look like? You're like, well, we have, start whiteboarding some certain things, and then you say, well, don't you just have a Visio? And they kind of laugh and chuckle. I'm like, no, really, do you have a Visio? And they don't, because they don't know, in a lot of cases, what their network looks like from an overall picture of that snapshot. But that you do need to understand how your network is situated. What is your policy for mobile devices, removable media? And it's imperative to understand all this, because it's all in that whole circle for the program to be successful. And I get this a lot. They say, well, why can't this project just take 2 weeks? And it just doesn't happen like that. This is an ongoing, living, breathing type of process where identifying your data that could take months, and then finding the owner or who owns that data, and then choosing some sort of technology, and then who owns that technology and enforcing it. It can be very time consuming. So this is another interesting point again with DLP is what are your policies and procedures? This is where you have to get your other stakeholders involved, whether that be your legal, your HR, definitely your C-level folks need to buy off on this type of project. But a lot of times people don't know the answers to this, and it's very important that you get that buy-in from those other stakeholders, because they're going to want to know, what this is all about. Because when somebody comes up and says, "Hey, I see this type of thing going on in the system, what do I do?" And the attorney or the HR is going to be like, "I don't know." So it's better to get everybody involved sooner rather than later. Again, companies have more data typically than they realize or understand with the backups, data at rest. Storage has become so inexpensive where they just keep going and going. So it's a lot of data typically to go through. When you're working with this kind of project, you have to map out your data flows, right? And say, or at least understand if this person emails this, or this person has this project, on SharePoint, what types of rules or things we have on SharePoint for data flows, and then looking at that data, how frequently is it used, and what users are accessing that data. And I always kind of note that DLP pretty much dovetails off identity access management. Those are very much one and the same. So it's understanding your users and how they use data as well. Understanding your critical data types is important. Finding the owner of that data can sometimes be very difficult because people obviously leave organizations. But somebody needs to own the data, and in a lot of cases it's more than one owner, because maybe it's financials, so maybe HR is involved, and then maybe the finance group is involved. But it is very valuable to understand that. And getting a list of the applications that you use in-house. Companies have, a lot of cases, more applications than they know what to do with. You're talking some companies have upwards of, 2,000 different applications. Now that's typically, a large bank of some sort, but understanding what those applications do and things of that sort is obviously all goes hand in hand. A lot of times people, they just, again, think DLP, I'll just buy this piece of network and I'll incorporate the entire corporation and we'll hope to be successful. And in a lot of cases that's failure from the start. We typically like to look at certain groups for DLP. Like we'll take a look at maybe the HR group or the finance group and just do DLP for that select group, and get a win and then start to the next group, versus just saying, hey, we're going to have 25,000 endpoints have DLP. It just makes it a little bit easier to measure success and report back to your other folks, your other stakeholders. Say, hey, we've implemented this, we're successful with this, and so on and so forth. So again, sometimes it can be a little difficult to do that. But when you're talking about like shared services, it's not, you can't just do one, right? If it's shared, sometimes you have to encompass both of them. But again, I wouldn't start with a shared service section. I'd start somewhere else, because you're going to have pitfalls regardless. Like your first go at that particular set, you may have some pitfalls and some learning experiences and things of that sort. So that's why you'd start with maybe the legal department that maybe not have so many shared services, so that when you go to that shared services, you can learn from some of those issues that you went through from that. And again, it's bosses and people that have the budgets, they always have this expectation of, well, we're going to get it, so we need to get it like now. And you really have to understand that this is, you'll never stop doing DLP. Just like intrusion prevention, it's never going away. It should be a living, breathing type program that changes often as you get new hardware, get new applications, new people leave, things of that sort. But But again, looking at that management and defining that to say, how are we going to approach shared services, right? There's got to be a way of managing that process. Knowing where your data resides is probably the most important, in my opinion, for DLP, because if you don't know where it is, then you're not going to prevent it from being lost. And it can come out of the woodwork, too, when you're doing this type of engagement or when you're doing this type of program. And again, what I was saying before, sometimes they have multiple owners, is if you do develop that ownership template, it becomes a lot easier when you do have more than one person, sometimes upwards of 5 to 6 people that actually own a piece of data, because it is a part of shared services, right? So it makes it a lot easier. For the most part, it's all structured data that what typically organizations have, but in some cases, whether if you're a manufacturing company or you have some CAD drawings, a lot of times it may be unstructured, and unstructured it's definitely not impossible. We just have to look at different ways of capturing that type of unstructured data. But typically, structured is pretty self-explanatory. It's what we're most used to seeing, whether it be a PDF, Excel, Word document, things of that sort. So again, getting back to starting small in a small group, gauge that environment and make decisions based on what you discover in that particular group. So if you're looking at, just for example, the HR, looking at their data, and you'll get a lot of lessons learned pretty quickly. But you also want to understand what type of security concerns are needed for sensitive data. So maybe you're going to put a confidential or severe or whatever. I mean, you can certainly do that. But again, starting small is important so that you can understand your environment a lot better. So, getting back to the development of the program, you need to determine your controls and standards and procedures. And a lot of this may be coming out of legal or your compliance program or your compliance department to understand what we need to audit, what we need to look at, things of that sort. Again, getting back to compliance, if it's PCI, credit card data, obviously is extremely important. And again, this is certainly a continuous review of systems that you're looking at, because as they change, you get upgraded and whatnot. Things change. Measuring success, again, is very important. Your stakeholders are going to want to know what's going on, where does this project reside, and things of that sort. So starting small in a small group it works well, so that you can say, hey, we've implemented this in the HR department. It is a success. We are capturing this. We are blocking this. We are doing this. So that is pretty imperative. And again, this is a process that you have to dedicate actual people to. You're not just going to say, here's my DLP program, check the box and move on. You're going to want to do some sort of post-implementation assessment to gauge how secure those controls are, and does it meet certain policy that you've set forth. And again, when you do this type of program, you have to understand, or at least be prepared for, what happens when there is an incident, and how does that affect your incident response. So when you do see data leaving your organization, at what point does that prompt that incident or that breach notification or that breach type process to kick in and say, okay, so we have all this data that just left our organization based on this system. How does that affect the incident handling of your organization? And that's something a lot of times people don't look at from that side. Same thing with what happens when they get a virus. They're like, well, what do we do? Right? What do you just re-image the machine? And so understanding your incident handling is pretty important when it comes to your DLP. You guys, any questions? Again, I apologize. This is meant for a 30-minute. They asked me to do an hour, so I said, okay. So. Mm-hmm. Structured data. Yeah. I mean, it's again, you have to work with that audit person or that compliance to understand the difference between your unstructured and what that regex is actually doing in your network type system that's blocking that, or at least looking at that to say, if I see this particular regex, I'm going to have to do this, right? Versus if it's structured, it's this. So it's definitely has to have some, I don't know why that just happened. Some nuances with that policy for sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yep. 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 And a lot of times you get that when you do that post-assessment piece of once you have, I know where my data is, I've classified it, I've done all that stuff. Now we're looking at some sort of technology that's either blocking or whatever you want to do. In that post-assessment, we'll find out or figure out what we're doing with that unstructured data, and is it truly capturing what it's meant to be doing, right? So if we want it to look for this and do this, is it actually doing that? And we'll find that on a post-type assessment for that. Anybody else have questions? That's all I got. Thank you.